Ladies and gentlemen, we are now refocusing on Poland, what's going on here in Poland. For us, it was very important organizing this event to have the informations, first-hand informations on sustainable finance in Poland. What is the status? Where are we now? And of course, we knew that we would like to reach out for the Związek Banków Polskich, the Polish Banks Association, because it's the voice of the industry. And on the other side, we also know or knew that PwC is doing for the second time this year a report, Zielone Finanse po polsku, Green Finance in Poland. And we are very lucky that we can present you, or they can present their findings themselves. In a minute, we will have a double input. And I am pleased to announce now Dorota Hutny, who is the ESG leader for the financial sector at PwC. Dorota, the floor is yours.
Bardzo dziękuję za zaproszenie.
Thank you very much for having invited me, and thank you for the opportunity to share the conclusions from our report that was published this Monday. This is the second edition of the report. It is a report that shows us how Polish banks have been striving to implement the sustainable development goals in their activity, in their strategies, in their product offer, in the risk management processes, in credit processes. The report is based on a poll that we sent to commercial banks and specialized banks in the Polish market. We got answers. I mean, the banks that answer are responsible for 70% of assets in the banking sector in Poland. There were 14 questions. The questions were like you could select from a list of answers, and the question, it was about how advanced a given bank is in implementing sustainable development goals, and also about the main challenges that they had faced during their work here, working on sustainable development.
Już od samego rana na dzisiejszej konferencji słyszymy, że jakby zrównoważone finanse jakby mają bardzo istotny wpływ na transformację.
Sustainable finances have a very important impact on fulfilling SDGs, ecological objectives, net zero emissions, and the key driver for the transformation is the financial sector. The financial sector also is burdened with many obligations
nakłaniających do przekierowywania inwestycji
that basically
finansowania właśnie w kierunku tej transformacji
redirect the financial flows towards more environmental friendly directions. The role of the bank and also other financial institutions is paramount. It is very important and very difficult because it is connected to many challenges. What are the main findings that we have? Apart from the questionnaire, we also talked about representatives of different banks, about how they assess their situation in the sustainable finance sector, and there were three very interesting remarks I wanted to share with you. The first one is that every bank that answered had already implemented some sustainable development elements in some areas of their activity. In, for instance, the strategy or the product offer or internal processes, administration, etc. Moreover, the majority, namely 80% of the banks polled, still intended to extend their product offer. So the offer for financing sustainable investments that are environment friendly. None of the banks polled mentioned that they wanted to increase the cost of financing dirty investments, those connected to coal, for instance, as they are called, the so-called dirty investments. This is ambiguous. This conclusion is ambiguous because the majority of banks in their ESG strategy decided to totally give up on this type of activity, and those that had not yet fully divested from fossil fuels, well, they simply didn't plan to increase financing in this sector. What they offer also are more attractive conditions or additional non-financial support if there are investments that are meant at fulfilling SDGs. Another interesting conclusion is that the majority of those who participated in the questionnaire, although we have a lengthy crisis, pandemic, and now followed by the war and the energy crisis, they did not expect to change their plans and strategies, the strategies connected to sustainable development. So in reality, the train is now in full speed, and it's going to be very difficult to stop it. What are the main challenges that Polish banks mention in terms of supporting the green transformation? First of all, they say they don't have enough data. The data is not fully available. And the data is needed in many areas. Reporting, because we know that there are now some requirements concerning reporting, but also proper management of risk, climate risk, physical risk or transformational risk, and also for the need of building a green portfolio, a green offer. The second major challenge mentioned by Polish banks is the lack of some finished regulations concerning sustainable development. So no delegated acts for the taxonomy of the European Union, no clear guidelines about how climate risk should be managed, and also lack of some final requirements as to green products or green reporting. And in this context, I must say, also in in-depth conversations we've had, the banks mentioned that this lack of regulatory security limits their possibility of initiating some new green product offers, because they have difficulties defining what is a green product in terms of credits, and in the back of their head they still feel the risk of greenwashing, of being suspected, like one of the investment funds we've mentioned here was simply accused of greenwashing some of their financial instruments. So very often the accusation of greenwashing is not due to bad faith, but lack of legal certainty is the main reason for it. And of course, we can add to this a wider context of the regulatory burden put on the Polish banks. And it is something that is also growing in sustainable financing. In the light of this burden, we have to ask about how competitive Polish banks are and will be, and whether they will be able to function in the regulatory environment to prepare some profitable products, securing green transformation, but also profitability and the proper and also keeping themselves safe from accusations of greenwashing. This legal uncertainty pushes the Polish banking sector towards compliance-centered talks. So they focus on compliance rather than focusing on the business aspect. So when we discuss with our partners from the States, the main topic in the States that is being mentioned in terms of SDGs and sustainable finances is the business case. It's a huge business opportunity, and this is a very huge opportunity for development.
Natomiast tutaj w rozmowie z lokalnymi przedstawicielami,
talking to local representatives, we are able to see that the approach is more compliance-focused to fulfill the regulations, to avoid penalty, and be compliant. Thank you so much for the possibility of this presentation. And I do encourage you to read our report, available on our website, as well as on our LinkedIn profiles. You will find a link to that report. There are also a lot of other interesting pieces of information about the situation of the Polish banking sector and how it's been facing challenges related to green financing. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, and now green finances from the perspective of the Association of Polish Banks, Director Norbert Jeziolowicz. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, hello. Thank you for the invitation to this conference and for the possibility of sharing the experiences of my organization concerning sustainable financing. It seems we've been doing a lot in this regard, especially compared to associations of banks from our region in the European Union. I talked to Dorota before we started the presentations, and I made a joke saying that she had an optimistic presentation and that I would be complaining. And that's the truth. I will be complaining, but the reason is that when banks meet within the framework of the association, just like in any other association or in the case of any other chamber, you don't really discuss things that are easy and pleasant. You don't really discuss successes, but you talk about problems, about barriers that you need to overcome, or legislative changes that are indispensable. So, in fact, we try to solve problems in our organization. So the things that we talk about are not really pertaining to the environment, protecting local communities, because that's obvious. We just talk about things that are obstacles to accomplishing those goals. So, first of all, a general introduction. The things that I'm going to talk about is not just the opinion of the banking sector, but similar experiences have been made by other elements of the financial sector. We organize different events together with other chambers. We have at least one colleague here from the Polish Insurance Chamber with whom I had the pleasure to cooperate. Hi, Paweł, again. We cooperate with the Chamber of Asset Managers, brokerage managers' chambers. So we all try to solve different problems. But to start on a more general note, let me say that the EU legislation, but also the Polish legislation concerning ESG, it overlaps with the already existing standards, global standards. So it's not like the standards on reporting in the area of environment or corporate governance have just been established. They existed before. There were different protocols before, greenhouse gas protocol and so on and so forth. So banks have been reporting, at least the biggest banks have been already reporting on that. In Poland, the biggest banks are at the same time public banks. So Polish banks had to quickly acquire new information in order to fulfill all the obligations imposed by new legislation. And the process is really fast. Legislation is not yet complete. If we were to organize a detailed webinar about reporting duties, you would be able to see a lot of areas that are sort of a white spot where you don't really know much. But reports are already being developed. Polish banks, the ones quoted on the stock, published on the stock exchange, all of them drew up a report published by the end of March about their customer portfolio based on data from 2021. So that's publicly available data. The reports differ for many reasons, because banks have different customers, and it all depends whether a given bank has a lot of businesses from the top 100 biggest Polish companies. The previous speaker has already said that banks try to fulfill their duties as well as possible, but they also run a lot of their own projects where they try to stimulate the behavior of their customers, making sure that customers opt for green technologies, making sure that banks offer financing for projects that have positive impact on the environment. So they've already did that before taxonomy, independently of the whole new legislation. So this new legislation is a huge problem because the law is not precise. If I were to sum up the number of hours we had to analyze a given position or a given law, how we understand it, also when it comes to Article 8 of taxonomy applicable to banks. And usually we have online meetings, and it's really hard to calculate how many working hours we spend working out standards, because usually we work it out based on draft documents, not final documents. And it's also multiplied. When we talk in chambers, the number of hours is even bigger. And there are a lot of problems related to that. And a new thing we all have to face, at least when it comes to environmental protection, we are starting everything from scratch. It's not like we can learn from other European member states or from other banks abroad. We are starting from scratch. For example, Bank Ochrony Środowiska in Poland, Bank for Environmental Protection that's been supporting environmental protection for 30 years, financing different governmental or public programs. To co-finance different initiatives aimed at environmental protection. And this bank has a unique experience in this area in Poland. It's been learning for 30 years after all, so it has great expertise. Colleagues from that bank have great expertise, but they have to sit at one table with us and learn it all from scratch, because what they've learned so far doesn't really fit the new reality and the new provisions, the new law. So undoubtedly, it causes problems. But also, you have this nice sensation that you are rediscovering new things. So you can interpret it like that as well. So from a banking point of view, the problem is that the new legislation is very fragmented. We are not only talking about SFDR and taxonomy, but about a whole lot of new legal acts regulating details or follow-up acts, such as different directives applicable to the financial world. Well, it's impossible, actually, for such an institution which has such a versatile business as a bank, and the same applies to associations. So we are not working in a single group, but in several dozen different groups that are discussing details. There can be a group which coordinates others, where the know-how meets, to make sure we know what's happening. But in my association, I deal with a few aspects of ESG, and I've already dealt with those issues on the business front. We have several working groups that deal with, well, different issues.
Co ta sytuacja powoduje oczywiście coś takiego u mnie, u nas, u koleżanek I kolegów z banku.
And as a result of this situation, myself and my colleagues, we feel that the legislation is not really coordinated. Legal acts are developed by different units, different directorates general, and they are not really matching. All of them are right and justified, but they are published in such a way that the implementation is really hard. And here you have an example of uncoordinated definitions of financial instruments. So MiFID II directive is a legal act which has already changed the financial market in the EU. All financial institutions have gotten used to it. It would be easiest to implement ESG using MiFID definitions. Otherwise, we would have to learn everything from scratch. Well, Dorota has already said it. She's already mentioned greenwashing. And under such conditions, it's easy to make a mistake, not intentionally, but when there's no support of the European supervision authorities, the European Commission, and I'm going to talk about this on the next slide, you can make such a mistake. Because at the end of the day, we need to take a decision without any points of reference in history. And this slide shows a general problem of ours on the financial market, not only the Polish market.
Taki trochę project management, jeśli chodzi o legislację ESG, który nie wyszedł.
So this is something that failed with regard to ESG and project management. This is quite a common situation, where first a deadline is quoted by which financial institutions have to submit their reporting. The deadline is fixed because it's a directive, but the directive was supposed to be followed by technical standards, delegated acts to tell us how the reporting is to be done. But either they are not delivered on time or they are delivered with a delay. And there are a lot of such examples. This is a list of delegated acts which were not known at all. Bear in mind that financial institutions have to report something, for example, from the 1st of January 2022, based on data from 2021, which they collect from their customers. That's the main challenge. Banks, investment funds. Well, it's easy to report for your institution, but you need to collect data from millions of customers. Or you have to at least know what sort of customers you are supposed to report on. So if something is in force from the 1st of January and is based on data for the previous year and is published on the 9th or 10th of December, don't even think about any banking institution implementing it so quickly and implementing electronic solutions so quickly, because nobody is doing it on paper. So vetting millions of customers is not based on paper reports. So actually, we could have avoided publishing those things because it was so outdated. So what is missing are several directives. This is European Single Access Point, ESAP, a single place comparable to Polish SP, where you can find everything, all data about companies that have the duty to report. So they report, and the competent authorities can vet that. That's a cool idea, but first, law is implemented, law on reporting, and only several years later, a European single access point will be established from which you can get the data. So everybody across Europe on the financial market are looking for data sources. And the next slide is going to talk about it. So no guidelines from ESMA. And the very last slide, and I'll be wrapping up. The main problem we have, and everybody has this problem, whoever wants to do their information duties fairly, is lack of access to data. In most European member states, including Poland, there are no official lists of businesses which are obliged to submit reports. How can a bank vet their customers and require data? Well, not everybody who has a duty has to submit a report. We talked to a foundation in Poland which wants to draw up a comprehensive list. If we are talking about stock exchange companies, things are easier, but it's not just about stock exchange companies. So things are difficult. Customers are not prepared yet because the system is being created, because first they need to collect data, which then they will be able to deliver to banks and other institutions. So if we are saying something should be published based on data from 2021 or 2022, well, in the perfect world where law management is responsible, our customers have to know at the beginning of the year what sort of data they need to collect. It's not data that you collect once a year in the afternoon. And another problem lack of standardization of data, like energy certificates, energy efficiency of buildings. This is also important from point of view of financing, mortgage and other things. So we are looking for opportunities, and I guess we won't find it before European single access point, because we would like to create a single platform where it will be possible to find all data which are necessary to create a report about the bank's impact and bank's customers' impact on the environment. And that's the last slide. I hope it wasn't too long. Thank you.
Thank you very much.